Hello,
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm just adjusting my camera. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you and hear you. Sound all right for everyone?
Hello, everyone.
Well, that's quite
Welcome to my
impressive.
workshop.
Do we get a workshop tour, or are you on a tripod, or are you?
It's a mess, and I'm on a tripod. I've moved everything out the way to
Oh, well, it looks
take
very
this
nice.
video.
Everyone, just
I can show you. I'll show you. I'll flip the camera. Here we go. Here's a mess.
yeah.
Quite a lot of mess. You can't really see all the mess there. Lots of mess. Lots of mess. Here I am back again.
So yeah, hang. So I'm just typing up questions as they come in. So
I missed quite a bit of what you said because I had to keep rejoining to be able to ask to join. Do
uh,
you see what I mean?
you can
Now I
build
can't hear you.
back in 2 seconds. What else can you build? Sorry, I just want to make sure I don't miss anyone's questions. Okay, so yeah, do you want to fill people in on kind of your background? Oh, actually, let's go back. Let's go back to the very beginning. So, how did you get into building guitars?
Teenage boredom, I guess, like everything else. Um, so I I started playing the guitar when I was not until I was about nearly 16.
Oh, that's quite late.
Um, yeah, it was quite late, but I was really into it because I was older, you know. So it was I was basically there were no teachers teaching anything apart from classical guitar then, as far as well I couldn't find any.
Hmm.
So I started having classical guitar lessons, and which I liked, I enjoyed that. But the second teacher I had, we also did some electric guitar stuff as well. But I went up to I think to grade 5 or 6 on the classical over a couple of years, so quite quickly, and
Yeah.
uh, playing like Villa Lobos preludes and stuff, and you know,
Hmm.
and uh, then when I was so that's not the history of guitar making, sorry, that's playing, and so when I was probably just been playing guitar for about a year. I read something in one of my like tuition books that said, I think it said you're not allowed to take all the strings off your guitar because you'll damage it. And I thought that sounds extraordinary. Why would that be? I can't imagine why that would be. And so I went to the library. Do you remember libraries?
I do
Or
remember.
they before you were born? I'm not sure. Anyway, I went, I went to the library and there was a book called uh, Build Your Own Classical Guitar. I think it was called by Irving Sloane. Very famous
Hmm.
book. I got it out of the library. Fascinating. Didn't say anything about not taking his strings off. um, so, um, what happened next? So I was quite fascinated. You know, I kept the book for a few weeks and was reading it, and you know,
Hmm.
learning it's basically a traditional Spanish guitar building, which is quite, you know, has uses very few tools. Really interesting method.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, my mum knew somebody who was she played in an orchestra playing the flute. One of her friends played the violin and in the orchestra, and he had made his own violin just at
Uh,
home, you know. With
yeah.
and she actually took me to see him, and I was to see what he, you know, he was on his second one by then, I think.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, if he can do it, I'm gonna I'm gonna try and make a guitar. So I
So how,
just we found a wood supplier. Sorry, your voice is cutting out when you're.
oh, sorry, how old?
Do you want to ask? How old was I then?
Yeah.
So I was 17,
17. Oh, wow.
uh, 16 or 17. Yeah, coming up for. Let me think. No, coming up. Yeah, 16 or 17 now. In the first year of my sixth form
Hmm.
year. Does that make sense? Yeah. And oh no, it was at the end of my first year. So it was so I made it. So basically, I got some wood from we found a supplier because that got the violin guy knew somewhere that sold instrument wood, and I used it as work avoidance during my second year of my A levels. So I just made a guitar in my bedroom and made a mess. And it took me about a year to make a guitar as in my my at weekends and stuff, or
Mhm.
just when I was trying to avoid work. And but I finished it. I had a guitar, so you know, and it was.
Yeah, how was
best fun I'd ever had.
was have you still got it? Did it
I
fly?
have, yeah. I think it might be in the workshop here actually. I need to take my headphones off to go and get it, but
Is it
it's
just corner?
sorry, hang on a sec. I've just got here we go. That's all right. Um, oh, what happened there? Sorry, I just talked to
Don't
somebody
know.
on Messenger by mistake. Uh, um, yeah, so I've got that here, and then I think when I was a student, I made two more guitars in the holidays. So I made an electric guitar and I made another classical guitar, and then
All of these, or did you
uh,
you?
say that again. Sorry, you cut out when I'm talking.
Did you keep all your like first ones? So your first kind of five. Did you keep those, or did you sell? When
Uh,
did you?
so the first one is still fine. The bridge came off, but I glued that back on. The electric guitar was, I hadn't got any power tools, and it was okay. I played it, and then I think I actually sawed it up and took the bits off it.
Oh wow!
Uh, so I think I've got the body still, but the neck, I, I was so skint, I actually sawed the neck up to get a truss rod out. I wouldn't do that now. um, and the third one, which was a classical, I think I was too experimental. It was a bit too lightly built, and it sort of it looked better than the first one, but it was a bit bendy.
Did it
So,
implode?
well, sort of, yeah. It's in my parents' attic, I think, probably. And
Nice.
then then I made two more guitars with some actual instruction. So a guy called Jeff Chapman in Brighton, who
Yeah.
died a few years ago, unfortunately. I made a steel string with him over about a year this was after I was a student and I had a job, and I was paid him to teach me, and he taught me a hell of a lot. Yeah, most of the techniques I use now are from when I started from him anyway.
Yeah.
And then I started making a flamenco guitar with Stephen Hill, well-known classical flamenco builder, who's
Mhm.
based in Lewes, where I live. He now lives in Spain, and so I made five guitars altogether before I sold any, which was your question.
Yeah.
And the first three were completely on my own. The second two were with much more guidance. And then I went sort of part-time in my job, and I started renting a bench in Stephen's workshop, and I made two guitars to try and sell, steel string guitars, and I managed to sell those to Richard Durrant, who's a well-known classical player, and Nick Pinn, who's an amazing
I
multi-instrumentalist in Brighton, a
oh yeah.
pioneer of.
We're in together.
Sorry, you cut out every time I was talking. Say it again.
I remember we went to see him together.
Yeah,
As
so he
part
was
of this guitar festival.
he. Yes, that's right. So he was like the first person I ever saw doing looping, and he used to loop lots of instruments, so not just a guitar at all. He'd have violin, mandocello, and he had his homemade rig that he used to do this. It wasn't a little pedal; it was like a mixing desk, and it's
Yeah.
huge. So he was a real pioneer of experimental electroacoustic music, which you could say precursor to a lot of things that went on a few years later.
Yeah.
So then I started getting some orders and started doing it full time. So that's a long but short version of the story. There you go.
The kind of, and in terms of, this is stuff that I get well out of my comfort zone very quickly. I think partly because everything you've built for me, I have absolutely loved, and just haven't had any questions because I've been too busy playing it. I've been like, this is awesome. So people like always, because they see the guitars, it's like, oh, who built this? And I'm like, well, this is built by Nick Benjamin.
Yeah.
And they ask me kind of loads of questions about like the methods used to build it and all the types of wood. And at that point, I have no idea. I'm completely tapping out. Oh, hang on, what's this? Which commercial scale acoustic manufacturer do you rate the most? That's a good question.
Is that for me, the question, or for you?
Yeah, I've got a list.
That's a difficult question.
Come back.
So I can answer it.
Oh yeah, if you're ready to go.
Okay, so the quality of cheaper guitars now is amazingly better than it ever used to be. It's really incredible. You can get very, very, very cheap guitars, which are amazingly good. If you're looking at what you might call more the handmade end of things, then I mean the most influential for me, most influential medium-sized manufacturer not in America would be George Loudon, the Loudon Guitars.
Yeah.
He's very important to the history of the modern guitar, really important. And big companies, I mean, if you think about the old companies, Martin and Gibson, they've been doing it for a very long time, and their methods are quite historic. Whereas then there's a new generation of commercial manufacturers, Taylor, Breedlove, and so on, and they started from scratch with very different machinery, much more modern machinery. They didn't have a sort of historical development, and their quality of like for instance Taylor guitars, I mean they're pretty much perfectly made. Whether you like them or not is a taste choice, not a quality choice. They're great. I won't mention the scoop cutaway when I talk about Taylor at the moment. Anyway, there we go. See, no sour grapes. So yeah, I'm still going to recommend Taylor as being one of the best quality big manufacturers. Loudon as being one of the best medium-sized ones. And there are lots of great companies. I'm not going to say any that I think quality is poor, and I won't go down that route. But nowadays, it's probably, if you go very cheap, the quality is amazing for how much it is. If you go expensive, the quality will be very good. It's the mid-range where you have to, maybe pick and choose and see whether you get the most quality or the most bling for your money. Is that a good answer?
That's brilliant. So in terms of your method, I mean, obviously there's some very kind of basic questions, but I think in terms of like your methodology behind the instruments that you build, is there a kind of guiding principle?
So no.
Okay.
That's the short answer. Even though I suppose I'm associated with people doing what used to be quite an extreme style, now has become part of the mainstream.
Yeah.
Before that happened, I mean, it wasn't something that existed. I mean, I considered the steel string guitar to be, I guess I didn't really think of it as a solo instrument. I thought of it as an accompaniment instrument, and I thought of people like Joni Mitchell as being the sort of the ultimate, musician on the guitar, perhaps, when I was starting out. I thought that's someone doing something really interesting, pushing the boundaries. Love the music, and but then as I was starting to make guitars, we had Pierre Bensusan play at the guitar festival that I helped run, and when I saw Pierre play solo, I was like, wow, that's this, the classical the steel string is equal to the classical guitar, and in the right hands, and it's not just an accompaniment instrument. And I think everyone else at this, all my potential customers, were also having the same journey. We were going, oh, hang on, the steel strings you can tune it into lots of interesting tunings, and it works best. You can't really do that with a classical because the tuning stability is poor for that. And it suddenly, from the legacy of the 60s, the solo fingerstyle guitar was obviously existed a huge amount, but it wasn't that popular when I, in the early 90s. But then it exploded, as you know. So the answer to the question is that my direction has changed as music has changed, or rather as my customers changed, and I haven't sort of gone, oh, here's how to design a guitar that is for this style or that style. Actually, it's more of an evolution. So I found out what worked. So like, say the guitar I made for Eric Roach, that before you ordered one, sounded great, but wasn't a very good stage guitar. It was too resonant. It's just too sensitive. Perfect for anything else. But and I think when I made your guitar, you were like, this is a stage guitar partly, and I built it I built a bigger guitar, which was using different materials that were more controlled sounding. And I thought, well, that's probably a better, even though the style we're playing has some, you know, some similarities, obviously. And but I'll make something that's a second, you know, evolutionary step from Eric's one. I mean, the one I made for Eric wasn't designed for percussion playing. He deliberately wanted a guitar for other things, so he wasn't really hitting it very much and stuff. So, and he liked particularly another guitar I'd made, which was very resonant and lots of overtones and stuff. So it's been an evolution. I mean, I've made a few prototype guitars where I've tried out something really wacky to try and, you know, improve the, you know, guitar. And almost every time I've gone back to where I started from and just made some smaller changes rather than those very big changes. And so now all my guitars have some, just, it's more to do with the layout of the guitar and things that would be influenced for, say, trying to stop breaking during percussion. You know, it's where the struts are in the soundboard to stop breaking, but the struts are the normal struts, they're just in a particular place. And then there's things like, you know, amplification has been very important for my customers. So I've, you know, if someone says I'm going to play on stage every night, then I immediately go, well, here's a route. And I don't build a guitar crazily different to someone that says I'm never going to play on stage. I just say, well, let's go for maybe mahogany, like a lot of your guitars are, or, you know, or a bigger guitar, which will be more, you know, it doesn't have to be built so lightly to get the bass and everything. So it's really, I don't even know what I just have an evolution. I don't really think about it now. I just, you know, I make lots of small changes all the time just for fun, really. And, you know, so my guitars now are quite different to the ones I made 2 or 3 years ago. To me, anyway. I mean, because I've made some changes, but they don't really look different. You know, and they're still the same type of sound, maybe. But so anyway,
that's fascinating. So in terms of like the different stages of building, because obviously I think most people have never seen like the inside of a guitar and don't really know what's going on. Have you got, what stages of guitar kind of building have you got that we could have a look at, or is everything at the same stage?
That you can see the current guitars behind my head.
Yes.
So at the moment, the bodies are finished. Those are actually hanging up. If I tilt up, you'll be able to see they're hanging up on the handles at the moment. So they haven't got necks on. Can you see the handles at the? I'll point my finger. These handles here. So rather than having a neck, they've got a handle tied. And this is what I use when I'm spraying the lacquer. So the neck is made separately to the body, but they're made to fit, you know. And then because basically the way I build the necks, they're bolted on, and the fingerboard end is glued down, but the main heel has 2 bolts that hold it on. So it's very easy to build them separately and then do all the lacquering. So you haven't got to get into all the corners and to make the lacquer really flat where the neck joins the body and all that sort of stuff. So you can get it's easier to get a really nice flat finish in that area. So I glue the bridge and the neck on when all the lacquering's finished. So I'm about to start the necks at the moment. So I'm actually rebuilding a guitar at the moment which has no back on it, which is a very special number 100, which is Mike Dawes' guitar. So it got very dry and the back shrank, which happens sometimes when guitars are in storage or on tour and stuff like that. And it's a guitar I didn't build for him to go touring with anyway. It was one I built as my special 100th guitar, and it had very wavy wood and stuff to make it look cool. It sounded. Sorry, start again.
Can we have a peep inside?
I was going to say if I move the camera, it might be a bit juddery. So there we go. That's really juddery. I kicked the tripod. All right, if you wait a sec. I need to turn it over first, but it's on its back at the moment.
Put on a rush.
There we go. I'm just going to flip the camera. Let's flip the camera. There we go. So this is Mike's main guitar that you'll have seen in a lot of Mike's earlier videos. Somebody I
Yeah.
used to know, and all those ones. Really wacky quilted, well, not quilted, but a rip sort of bear. It's not really a bear claw top. It's like a just got big wobbly bits in it. So you can see all the stripiness in the top there.
Mm.
And the bridge is really, kind of crazy grain and stuff. And so I'm going to flip this over and so this is quite different to how I build most of my guitars now. And it's got a clampy thing in the way and everything. So this is the guitar without the back on and without the neck on. And it's just had the old back's been removed, and I'm actually making a brand new back for this one because I just decided to update it. And the back got damaged taking it off, unfortunately. So basically you can see a guitar. Traditionally you've got the ribs or the sides. So these are the vertical bits here.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two pieces like that which are basically the same in terms of they're bent to a guitar shape. So they're quite thin, and you actually use heat to bend them. There's various methods. The front, so the soundboard, and then the back are big sheets of wood, and they're quite thin. So say this is a type of rosewood, Cocobolo rosewood it will have. Not sure where the back is, it's in the other room. This is only going to be about 2 millimeters thick, so it's quite a thin piece of wood. If you can imagine, that's it's very thin. You see this little piece of wood here? This is a bit of ebony. That's about 2 millimeters thick. It's about the same thickness as the back. So it's quite, I mean, some makers will do thicker than that. But I'm just trying to illustrate that you'd be surprised how thin the back is. Depends on the type of wood. Cocobolo is very, very solid. So the front and the backs aren't as thin as that. The front, sorry. So the front usually would be a bit thicker than that, maybe 2.5 to 3 millimeters thick. And those, because they're so thin, they're very floppy on their own. Well, not floppy, but they're not very strong on their own. So what all of these strips here are for, they're called struts or braces, if you can sort of see. Those basically, and there's a plate here on the soundboard which reinforces where the bridge area is. These make the thin back and the top much, much stronger. But rather than just using a really thick top to make it stronger, using braces means that the guitar is much lighter and more resonant, but strong. So it's a bit like lots of things, like an aeroplane or something. You're trying to make something that's strong but not heavy. And so what that means, if it's not heavy, it means that it's easier to make it come into life when you pluck the strings, to put it simply. The more weight there is, the more energy it needs to move the top or whatever. So it makes, if you can make a guitar with a top that's thin, but not too thin, but thin enough for what you're trying to do, which is then it needs the struts. And how you do all those is one of the big aspects of how a particular guitar maker's guitar will sound. So but to look at a guitar and say, oh, that's going to sound like this or that by looking at the struts, it's very, very difficult, because you don't know how thick the top is or what the pieces of wood are actually, how stiff they were in the first place and all that stuff. So when I make different styles of strutting, it's more about the whole weighting of the thing, so the exact shapes and everything like that are things I sort of gradually change over time. But the overall sort of tightness of the soundboard or the back is the most important thing, and that gives you the control or the liveliness in the sound. So that's really what I'm doing when I'm trying to make a guitar that's going to work as possible, well as possible for someone like yourself or any customer, is that I'm trying to make it controlled and sensitive as well. So they're two opposite things maybe, and that's effectively what you're trying to do, making a good handmade guitar. You're trying to make something that it's balanced and even in its sound, so it hasn't got anything suddenly a particular note that goes out of control compared to the other ones, but it has to be sensitive, but not too sensitive, because if you're a hard player and you play a really sensitive guitar, it's just going to get all buzzy and
Yeah.
maybe feedback really easily in a live environment. So um, the that's really what my job is to get that judgment right. So you can make a guitar that's just as good quality as mine in a factory, or modern factories quality. The accuracy is great,
Yeah.
but it's the judgment. It's that judgment where I'm looking at the individual bits of wood,
Yeah.
and I'm choosing exactly how big to make everything for that particular piece of wood on that particular guitar. And
Hmm.
hopefully, if I'm doing my job right, that is my job, is to do that. The rest of it's just carpentry.
Can you just
Right, shall I go back on to? Sorry.
Yeah. Wait, I just want to just go through the details of this. So you've got the struts going across, but then what are the little like individual small bits around the edge?
So
Um,
these bits? Do you
no,
mean no? These.
yeah, these ones. Well, I've never.
So 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 that's what's called a lining or the kerfing. So you can see on the back, there's the same on the front and the back. The design varies. What they do is this is where the edge of the top or the back's going to glue on. So you need a wider. Imagine trying to glue the back onto like a 2 mm wide little
Increase
strip. Yeah, so it increases the gluing area, and also it can stiffen up the sides if you want it to do that. And it just makes there are some old instruments from hundreds of years ago that didn't use any of these. They just did use a very thin edge, and they're surprisingly okay. I mean, they because they're quite flexible, they just sort of bend slightly rather than breaking. So there's lots of, this is just a modern, the standard way. And for me, I'm not trying to make some radical thing that's different for the sake of it. I'm just trying to balance up the design so that it works as well as possible. I don't do stuff for that's different for the sake of it. I've tried lots and lots of things, and a lot of the things I now do are really quite standard, if you like. So do you want to look more? Sorry, every time I talk I can't hear you, so I'm probably talking over you all the time.
Don't worry about that. I'm just trying to think what else you've got. Have you got I'm trying to think my favorite things that I've seen when I've been in. I love the splat.
So here's the guitars, and here's the mess. Yeah, okay. So the front one's my concert model, which is my newest model. Comes with a rather than a scoop cutaway, it comes with a more modern Florentine cutaway. So that's like a pointy cutaway rather than a rounded one. There's two of those there. There's a maple one. The next one is African Blackwood, which is a type of very dense rosewood. It's got bloodwood bindings. You can see, even though it's very, very fancy woods, if you like, or very rare ones, I still keep my instruments very simple, and I just like the woods to, just make the colours go well together, and if I put loads of shell around the edge of it as well, I mean, it just becomes, for me, it's just not my taste. So again, here's another concert guitar. So it's my biggest model. And this one is Cocobolo, which I know you like that, with the sapwood, the yellow sapwood. So there you've got a very decorative looking guitar, but it's just the wood grain,
Yeah.
Great. That's what I like. Okay, next one's a jumbo, and this one's black walnut. So it's an American black walnut with Sitka top. Your baritones are the same shape as that. So I make the jumbo for baritones often. The next three are all, so where are we? Yeah, the next three, I've got another Cocobolo one, and then a mahogany one, and a Indian rosewood one. Those are all my JOM, which is the model that you've mainly got. So it's a big OM orchestra model, Martin sort of style, which is like the OM is a sort of a medium width waist. So it's not a really tight waist, and it's not a really flat waist like a dreadnought. It's sort of medium, and this is like a bigger version of that. So that's one that's become very popular because of you, probably, and because it works really well. And then there's a normal OM at the end there. An OM is, you can see it's smaller than the quite a bit smaller than the JOM, and it's really quite a. Sorry, I cut you off again.
Oh, sorry. I always forget how big mine are, just because I'm used to them. I don't really think of them as being that large, but they are. Yeah, they're pretty chunky.
Yeah, so the JOM that you use a lot, it's actually the width of the guitar at the widest point is about the same as a dreadnought. but the body is shallower. So if you look at that's one that's basically really similar to your guitar I'm looking at the moment. So the body is about the same depth as a smaller guitar, but the outline is bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, and I found that really works on this model. I don't ever make them deeper, really. I mean, this one actually, I say that this one's slightly deeper, but that's because I've made it out of rosewood, and it's kind of a bigger, more solid version of this guitar. The mahogany ones are sort of more airy sort of sound, as as you're familiar with, rather than super deep sound. It's more of a mid-rangey, nice growly, harmonically rich sound, whereas a rosewood version is much deeper and more metallic sounding, perhaps. So I made that one a little bit deeper just for a particular customer. So yeah, for me, the comfort of a guitar is a lot of it's down to the depth rather than the actual outline. So, and the way I build, I don't really find that deep guitars sound better than shallow ones. They're not shallow; they're just shallower than some people would do, and it's just much more comfortable, and the sounds better sometimes. Certainly doesn't sound worse. Well, my sister's waving at me on the comments. So
what's in
yeah.
the other, I think?
Say that again.
What's in the other room as well? The other room it's more of the
even more mess. Oh, so much mess. Look at the mess. Oh, look at it. I've just moved everything out of the way so I could film. Mess. It's embarrassing.
Oh,
there's mess. Look at the mess. God.
If you look kind of
say that again.
Down in the corner, there's a thing that in my head I always call.
Oh, you want to see the new shmoo, whatever it is? Have
you got a new shmoo?
No, it's a cartoon. It's before your time. Sorry, it's a strange blob creature. Look it up. Yeah, that's a strange jig that you like. Yeah, it's I don't actually use those anymore, but they're something a teacher of mine made them for me. They were used for clamping on backs and fronts using elastic bands.
Yeah.
So you put the guitar on that, and all of the very big elastic bands hook onto the those sticky out bits. Yeah. And but I use like two dishes, one on the top and one on the back, and I use clamps. So there's next for the next batch.
Oh.
So I'm making 8 guitars at the moment.
Do you normally make all batch?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point to talk about. So I've always made. I think I've never made one guitar on its own, apart from when I first started. Mm-hmm. When I was in the very early days, I usually used to make 2. So it's great because you can compare them. And you can check that the feel's similar for both of them if you're not sure how thick to make a bit or whatever. And also when a glue is drying on one, you can go move over to the other one, and the same with the lacquering, etc. And then I moved up to 3. I think I moved up to so for quite a long time I did 6 guitars at once. And then I've decided that I wanted, because of the spraying lacquer, I wanted to do that when the weather was warm. So it was really difficult if I ended up doing it in the winter when it was really cold and damp. The lacquer would bloom and stuff, it goes sort of white. So I thought I'd try and make a year's worth of guitars in every batch, so that each year I can do the spraying at roughly the same time. Do you see what I mean? So then I moved up to like 8 or 10 guitars, that's how I don't make any more than that a year, actually. I think the most I've ever made is maybe 12 guitars in a year. And at the moment I'm making 8 in this batch. I think I made 10 in the last batch, and it took me longer than a year to do that. I mean, it's partly because I'm doing, if I really got my head down, did nothing else, and just really worked hard on just guitars and had no life, then I could probably make 12 or 15 a year. And the way I'm doing it, and I have big respect for people that do that, but I'm a lazy bugger, so well, not lazy, but I find it to concentrate properly and do it properly. I can't work huge long hours. I mean, I'm in my workshop 8 hours a day for 5 days a week, and that's as much as my brain can cope with from the fiddliness. I'd start making mistakes. Sorry, say that. Start again, sir.
Someone's just said that they bet it smells lovely in there, and I can safely say that it does smell lovely in there every time I bet.
It doesn't. It does, and the wood smells all right too. Yeah. Boom, boom. Sorry. Uh, sorry, the
Odd.
cabin fever's getting to me. You can tell.
John D has just said that his old number 25 from 2001 is just getting better and better.
Yeah, John's one of my earlier customers who lives locally. We bump into another quite often. He's got several guitars I made, I think, including an electric guitar, which I don't make that often.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot. So a lot of my earlier work was let's go through the messy sync, wood. All of those bits of wood there are all going to be struts. So that's a lot of Sitka spruce, which is really, really strong type of spruce that used to make airplanes out of. So all those struts we were looking at were made from this. So that's all drying. It's cut up into bigger bits, and then it'll be cut up into like here's some smaller bits. So that's all drying away. These are ebony fingerboards here, which I use some of the time. You can see the ends of those there, and bits for necks and stuff. So a lot of the woods have to be dried for a long time. Here's other bits. So we've got this is some very rare mahogany, absolutely amazing piece of mahogany for necks. It's very difficult to get this now, and it's lovely to use. Looking at alternatives for the future. So that's maple. I'm using there, European maple. And if we go over to those ones I was making, this is actually made from an old cupboard. This bit, okay. Wardrobe, it's made from a French wardrobe. That I've got a French customer who said, there's all this old furniture that you can buy in flea markets, and it's made out of ancient, native French walnuts. It's dead cheap, so no one wants it. Can I send you a bit of it and make me a guitar out of it? So I did. Here we go. I'm making it now. So there's the neck. So that's a reclaimed piece. And there are some makers that do. I used to try to do a lot of reclaimed stuff, but it's very difficult to get the quality I wanted. Some makers, like Adrian Lucas, for instance, specialize in using lots and lots of reclaimed timbers. And I should do more, and I'm starting to do a bit more. But it's depends on it depends how your life is and everything. Whether do you have to do a lot of sourcing and stuff and set up all the links to do that. So this is a maple neck. Again, it's an alternative material. Apart from violins have been made from that for hundreds of years, so it's not really an alternative material. It's just a bit more difficult. It's a heavier maybe, and a little bit more difficult to carve. So, and it does give a different sound to the guitar, which is controversial, but on acoustic guitar, the wood does make an awful lot of difference, and there's no denying. Certainly the feel of the guitar changes quite differently with different neck timbers.
John's just saying that he remembers selecting. John's just saying that he remembers selecting a piece of wood that was from an ancient coffin.
That's right. So reclaimed. So Brazilian rosewood was one of the woods that's been very carefully controlled, as it should be.
Yeah.
To cut it down. So if you could get
I've lost
ancient stuff, yeah, I think it was from a coffin. Yeah, it was from a coffin maker. That's right. It was. That's where the I haven't built a Brazilian rosewood guitar for a long, long time. I'm not planning to. So Cocobolo. This is Mike's new back. Here we go. Exclusive. That's Mike Dawes' new number 100 back. Super wacky. It looks like a strange river with rapids in the middle of it, I think.
Yeah.
The old one he called the Angry Penguins.
The Angry Penguins?
Yeah, well, it did look. The two sides look like two penguins having an argument. Anyway. There's the fingerboards. So those have got silver inlays, which I started doing the last few years as a standard thing. So the little dots are actually silver rod stuck in the hole and leveled. So you're seeing the end of a short piece of silver rod. Nice alternative to the mother of pearl or whatever. Routers, clamps. I've got lots of gloves. I'm thinking about donating them, but I might. Anyway, it's another story. What else have we got? So up here's all sides. So those are Indian rosewood sides, all in pairs. And over the side there we've got mainly mahogany sides at the bottom, and then some Cocobolo.
Mm.
And then at the top, there's more bits like maple and cypress and koa. I'm building quite a few koa guitars in the next batch, loads of koa.
Oh, someone,
Soundboards,
actually, a friend of mine's just asking if have you ever made an
acoustic bass guitar. No, I've made lots of baritone guitars.
I've got a couple.
Yeah, I know you have. um, so to make if you imagine how big a double bass is, that's how big you need the body to be to get a proper deep sound out of that lower note.
Mm.
So if you make an acoustic guitar bass, it will never sound really, really loud and deep like that. However, it can sound great. It's a different thing. It sounds a bit more like a baritone guitar, but lower. So it's quite a sort of fat sound, but rather than a really deep sound. And I would think of it as probably as an electroacoustic instrument if you were performing. So if he wants to order one when I'm taking orders, I'd be very happy to. I'd be very happy to make one, but I have never made one.
Would you be tempted to use the kind of, I guess, the mariachi method? The super deep. I've got one downstairs.
I know what you mean. I think, yeah, so that's about the biggest guitar bass you can buy. I don't know, how low does that go down?
I actually don't know how you're supposed to tune it. I've tuned it to all kinds of things over the years, but it's got an incredible tone. I mean, it just sounds like a double bass, really.
So what's happening with some of those instruments and the bass ukuleles is that the strings they're using are made out of I think it's like almost like a rubber compound. So they resonate at a very low frequency without being too loose.
Yeah.
If you used bass guitar strings, so the sort of, you can get bronze ones that you'd use, but it's basically similar to an electric bass. If you use those on an acoustic instrument, it doesn't have that sort of warmth in quite the same way as you get from things like the instrument you're talking about. So yeah, if someone said I want a bass guitar, I might say, well, maybe a steel string isn't the right thing to make. Maybe you should look at using some of the other, like the bass ukulele strings or something like that. But you're right, that's a really, really big body. But how do you get a case for something like that? Especially when making a one-off version, unusual version, stuff like that. There's a lot of practical aspects.
Crazy deep as well. It's about 2 feet deep, I think.
Yeah, no one wants to, unless you're in a mariachi band. No, it's great for recording, definitely. If you're,
Someone else is asking. Well, there's a few things. One person is asking, which guitar took you the longest to make?
The longest to make. I'm just going to put my camera back on the stand. Hopefully it won't switch off when I put the clamp on. Sorry, I just don't want my new phone to land on the floor. The longest to make. I guess basically there's something. The more features something has, i.e., the more extra aspects. So the guitar I made for Mike Dawes recently, which if you go on my Instagram page, you'll see a whole build story for it. So Mike's fairly new guitar, he's had it for a while now, is actually sprayed black, but it's a maple guitar, and it uses no tropical timbers at all apart from the fingerboard and some small bits of ebony on the scoop and stuff. Anyway, that was part of the vibe, and that has a lot of complicated extra features. So it's a fan fret, so that means the bass strings are longer than the treble strings. The nut and the saddle are at angles. A subtle fan on that, so it's kind of a baritone guitar. It's longer than a normal guitar scale length, but it's not as long as most baritones. So it's sort of an extended range guitar, if you like. Yeah. But that has lots. That basically has that had lots of extra features. That probably is the longest. So it had it had the head was it had like bass tuners on the bottom 2 strings, and it had it's now got banjo tuners on the top 2 strings for doing all the old Adrian Legg, Nick Harper, John Gom note bends, and it's got it had a very complicated pickup system, so it had extra pickups under the 2 bottom strings, so you could put those through a octave pedal to make a separate bass sound that's just on well, it had a switch so you can go one string or both.
Yeah.
And it had about, yeah, it had a battery draw and stuff, which I wouldn't normally do, but it's for a, you know, for very much a performance guitar. You've got so many wires and stuff inside that it's changing batteries have been a nightmare through the sound hole. So we put I put in a plastic battery draw, you know, which is great. You can replace them easily.
Detailed question just in. What
Okay.
percent of guitars?
Sorry, start again. Start again, Sam. Sorry.
Okay. What percentage of guitars that you make are one-off customs compared to a design you've used before? And do you use any modeling software to develop designs, or do you just do hand sketches?
Okay, yeah, good questions there. Essentially, every one I make is a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I use my standard designs to some extent. So, for instance, I very rarely make a new outline shape unless I've want to make a new model. So I've done there's the concert model recently, which is like meant to be a sort of a. It's meant to be my answer to North American guitar design at the moment. So if you look at some of the great North American makers, Linda Manzer and Grit Laskin, people that trained with John Larive, there's a certain style that they have, which, you know, obviously different for different makers, but there's a vibe, and I decided I like that, and I wanted to do my answer to that. So the concert model was a new model, which no one said, can you make this new model for me? I just thought, well, all my other guitar models have a certain sort of more traditional vibe to them in terms of the outline, not the decoration, if you want to call it that, but certainly the outlines. And I decided, well, I should make something that's definitely quite modern and in that style, because it's, and it's been really, really popular. Lots of people have gone for it. And then I made another new model before that, which I called the Model M, which God knows where that came from. I think it came from it's not a medium-sized guitar. It came from so Martin made a M model. The Martin M model was a shallow-bodied version of their J model. Their J model, so Martin J model was a jumbo. It wasn't one of their traditional models. I think it was in the 70s, maybe the late 60s. And so the Martin J whatever was a deep-bodied guitar, and then the Martin M whatever was the same shape, but it was a medium depth.
Yeah.
And it's like a sort of more direct sounding guitar, quite mid-rangey, and that's M maybe stands for mid-range. Okay. And it's basically a more of a folk orientated folk accompaniment rather than solo guitar idea with that one.
And do you use any modeling software at all, or are you?
Okay, so I trained as an engineer when I was in my teens. I did an engineering degree, and I spent an awful lot of time using AutoCAD and stuff, early days of that, and 3D modeling and stuff, which was very early days of that. Yes, you can use, if you're just thinking about, I think the question is looking at, do I do my shapes using that? No, but that's mainly because I just haven't bothered to set it up. I would consider using that to do that, because you get a very even curve. You can use spline curves and stuff where you move the points around, and you can, but you get a really nice change in the curve. Whereas when you're doing it by hand, it's a. When I see guitars that have been drawn like that, they're a bit like modern houses that have been drawn on CAD. They look a bit boring to me. I like a bit of unintended, not too much, but I like a little bit of not wonkiness even, but some not absolutely like flowing curves, a bit of character in there. So I don't use modeling software, but I'm not against it. It's just I actually downloaded AutoCAD onto my old laptop, and I couldn't really remember how to use it. So I can't really be bothered. I just carry on with a pencil. Also, so this is a more interesting point. So when you bend wood, or any material that's that has fairly even properties, you actually get naturally you get a spline curve. So that's where the idea, I think, it's a spline curve. One of the mathematical curves you get, which look really cool, come from bending real materials, and it's a mathematical expression of that. So when you're bending wood, I mean, I do this in a side bending machine now, but even in a side bending machine, the wood springs back and it does what it wants to some extent. You can't make it do sudden things that it might break if you do, or it'll always even its own curves out.
Yeah.
So what I actually do is I draw so here's some maybe some insight into my process. So I draw a shape until I think it looks cool, and I actually use some ratios to do that often these days. So I would look at simple ratios. So maybe the waist is 3 to 4 compared to the hip, or the waist, and everything. Or maybe I use the golden ratio, which the waist to the hip measurement is whatever it is, 1.618 or something. And the reason I do that is because that's what your brain is looking for, I think. And so if you're kind of somewhere near one of those ratios, it looks good usually. So I use those to make a choice when I'm not sure, how wide to do this a bit or whatever. But then I make a mold. So a mold is the bit that the guitar is going to be inside. You saw that earlier on with Mike's guitar with the back off. That was inside a mold just temporarily at the moment. So I make a mold, and then I make a bending form, which is like an exaggerated version of that. So it's like, because the wood will spring back when you take it out of the bending system. So it gets hot, and then it sort of depends on the species of wood, but it gets locked into the curve. But then it does spring back a bit when you take it out. So you make an exaggerated. You have to guess how much to exaggerate the shape. And then what I do is that when that comes out of the mold, usually it looks like quite a nice curve because of what I was talking about, the spline curves, where the wood doesn't do what it's told exactly. It comes out with a smoother curve than you maybe have tried to make it do. And then I fit that into my mold, and basically I allow it to not be the same as the mold exactly. I allow the wood, I make sure it has the same gaps on both sides. And then you get a nice, all my models are a combination of a drawing, a mold, and an actual process of bending, and they have their own shape that isn't the one I drew. It's slightly different, and it's an improved version because the wood has done a smoother curve than I drew usually. So I've actually recently started trying to draw the real shape that I'm making, and I've got a few templates.
We have 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Blimey, we've been talking for a whole hour.
I was trying. I've got loads of questions. Maybe let's end on one like minute and a half answer. How does the shape of a guitar affect the sound? Obviously, it's a very complicated thing, but just in kind of vague principles before we stop.
Yeah, that's fine. That's a very good question. So when I'm building guitars, that's the main thing. Apart from what woods I'm going to use, the main thing I'm doing is varying that outline. And then most of the guitars are built to a similar technique. Maybe sizing of things is different. On small guitars, things will be lighter because anyway. So basically, when a guitar is smaller, in order to get its lower frequencies responding more fully, you have to make it more flexible. So if something gets smaller, you have to make the soundboard or the back more bouncy, or rather you have to make it lighter so it's the same sort of amount of bouncy as a bigger guitar. And in a big guitar, you can make everything more solid without losing bass and stuff like that. So when I'm advising a customer, so if say they're going to play in low tunings all the time, then I always try to make them go or steer them towards a big guitar. So with a big guitar, this is simple. There's also the sort of shape and everything, but the bigger guitar.
In 5 seconds. But thank you so much.
All right, we're done. We'll carry on another time.
But I'll see you guys around. Thanks for watching.